Okay, Alexander, we did a video where we discussed the Russian economy the other day. Let's dive into the Chinese economy. And this is going to be, I think, a pretty interesting video because the Chinese economy, and we did mention the Russian economy that in the Russian video, that the global economy is slowing down in general, the world economy. The Chinese economy appears to be slowing down very rapidly. What do you make of the Chinese economy slowing down in comparison to the global economy? And is this attributed at all to the trade war and the tariff war with the United States?
Right. I think the first thing to say is that there is no question at all that the Chinese economy is slowing down. And it's slowing down a lot. And the Chinese government and the Chinese media are admitting as much. If you go on to the Duran, you will see that we've linked to various articles by Global Times, which is a semi-official Chinese newspaper, which is owned by the Chinese Communist Party, which has admitted that there is a slowdown in economic growth in China. Now, there is some uncertainty as to how great that slowdown is. I should say that there's been a long-standing suspicion that Chinese growth figures are not accurate and appear to give an impression of an economy that's growing faster than it actually is. And this is a long-standing problem going back, well, decades. But they're the usual figures that most people accept. Recently, however, as you probably know, as some of our viewers may know, a Chinese academic was caught on video on television saying that in 2018, last year, a secret government commission calculated that the real rate of growth of the Chinese economy was no more than 1.7%. Now, if that's true, that would mean that China's economy is practically at a standstill by Chinese standards. It would be a very radical slowdown indeed, and it would mean that it is growing less fast than nearly all the other major economies, including perhaps including Russia's and that of the US. I mean, the US grew quite strongly last year. So that's where we are. We don't know how fast that slowdown is. My own guesstimate is that it's actually not as bad as that academic said. I think it's probably growing at below 6%, but not much below 6%, around 5 to 6%. But by historic standards, that is a very big slowdown. Now, I think the reason this is happening is not primarily because of the trade war. The trade war hasn't yet kicked in. The reason it's been happening is that as a result of the global financial crisis of 2008, the Chinese government encouraged a very, very great amount of monetary easing in China. It did its own kind of quantitative easing, if you like. This has poured money throughout the Chinese economy. It stimulated the Chinese economy to grow to an extraordinary degree. The result is massive overcapacity in large sectors of the Chinese economy and a very significant growth of debt. Now, I think what has happened over the last few years is that the Chinese government understands all this, is concerned about it, wants to bring that debt under control, and has itself intentionally been slowing the economy down in order to deal with this problem of excess capacity and debt. And I think the rise of Xi Jinping to a position of paramount leadership in China is connected to this, with the Chinese political leadership understanding that since China needs to slow its economy down in order to rebalance It needs a very strong leader at its head in order to see off any potential political challenge. So I think that the rise of Xi Jinping and the slowdown are two connected things. And I think that it is something that the Chinese government has intentionally engineered in order to prevent further problems further down the line. Now, I'm going to say something quickly about the trade war. I don't think, as I said, that the trade war has caused this slowdown, except that I suspect that the sentiment that it's created has created a degree of uncertainty in China, which may be preventing Chinese businesses from taking investment decisions. And that might have contributed to the slowdown to some degree. But I don't think it's a significant factor.
You mentioned the debt. At what levels is the debt? Are we talking EU, red alert levels, or is this something that China can easily handle?
No, it is not anywhere close to that level. And I think that's a very important point to make. Also, China, the Chinese central government, the federal government, the Chinese central government has a very good balance sheet. And the local governments not less so, and private businesses less so. But China also has very deep savings. It's a problem. It's a problem that can be sorted out, and the Chinese government does have the means to sort it out. So we are not talking about a crisis. And can I make one very important point here? That one should never, ever treat a slowdown in an economy as a crisis. We did a video, a program a few weeks ago in which I explained how the slowdown in the Russian economy after 2012 was a product of the Russian government's policy of eliminating inflation, of slowing the economy in order to reduce inflation. What we're seeing in China is something similar in some ways. It is a slowdown intentionally engineered by the Chinese government to reduce debt. Provided it's successful, it will leave the Chinese economy stronger going down the line than it would be otherwise.
Does this slow down in 2019? Does this give the United States any sort of leverage as it enters more trade negotiations with China?
I think this is something that some people in the United States believe, and I think it's a dangerous misconception because I don't think, as I said, that they realize that this slowdown is something that the Chinese government has itself engineered. And I think that they think that because the Chinese economy is slowing down, this means that there is a crisis brewing in China and that the political situation there is becoming unstable, and that as a result, if they push hard, the Chinese will make concessions in order to get the US to ease off. I don't think that calculation is correct at all. On the contrary, my guess is that Xi Jinping, having been brought in as a strong leader to manage this process effectively, is going to be less willing to make concessions than an earlier generation of leaders, someone like Hu Jintao might have been, Hu Jintao being the leader who preceded Xi Jinping. So I think if that is what the US thinks, then they're making a grave miscalculation.
Are there any fears that China could actually enter into a recession? I mean,
Yes.
I've never heard of in my lifetime a Chinese
Yes.
recession. All we hear is
No.
5, 6, 7%, 8% growth.
Well, indeed, and 10% and 10% growth a few years ago. I think there is a possibility. I think it's a very strong one because I think that the Chinese government will not want to see a recession in China. And as I said, I think they have more than enough financial firepower to prevent that. What they want is to see the economy slow down. Can I just say something? They did exactly the same thing in the 1990s. The major economic policy maker at that time was a man called Li Peng, who is a very unpopular figure with some people, both in China and in the West, because he played a central role in suppressing the Tiananmen protests, which happened in 1989. But in some ways, he was a very good manager, The problem in China then was inflation. He wanted to bring inflation down, and he did that by slowing the economy, and that's exactly, as I said, what the Russians have been doing, and it's exactly what Xi Jinping is doing now, but for a different purpose. As I said, to slow the economy down, to get on top of this problem of debt.
All right, let's shift gears a little. You mentioned about crisis, and one of the crises, which is linked to the economy, but we're shifting gears a little bit, is the Huawei crisis, and of course that involves Canada and the United States, but recently, the ambassador for China in Canada came out with a fierce letter towards Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, where he actually accused Trudeau, and this is the kicker of them all. He actually said that he accused Trudeau of violating human rights and being a racist because of the arrest of the Huawei executive. What do you make of that?
Well, I think
Trudeau must have been, his head must have exploded.
Well, he must have exploded, and I think it was intended that it would, because the Chinese know exactly what kind of virtue signaling Justin Trudeau undertakes. This habit that he has of always appearing as the great liberal, freedom rights, human rights champion. And I think they went for him at what they suspect, what they know is his weakest and most sensitive point. At the same time, what those comments show is how angry the Chinese are with Trudeau and with Canada. I think they're absolutely furious about this, and they will not let the Canadians and Trudeau forget it. And unfortunately, we've now received reports that another country, Poland, seems to be doing the same thing. They're now arresting Huawei executives and charging them with espionage. And I think we're going to see the Chinese becoming more and more angry as it becomes increasingly clear that this major Chinese technology company is being specifically targeted, not, I think, because it represents any kind of threat to the West, but because the United States sees it as a competitor.
Yeah, Huawei is doing too well I think it's scaring a lot of the Silicon Valley execs.
Well, it is indeed. I mean, and we've seen that, Apple has come up with a set of bad results. And of course, the temptation in the United States is to blame all that on Huawei, especially as Apple is blaming those results on the slowdown in China, which seems to be bizarre, actually. But I mean, they're linking it all together, and they're saying, and there is a campaign underway to stop Western businesses and Western companies and Western public bodies using Huawei and Chinese software and hardware, because supposedly this is susceptible to Chinese espionage activity. No one has ever proved that. And of course, if any country has used its software and hardware in order to facilitate espionage activity, that country is the United States. But of course, this is all part now of a campaign against Chinese technology companies, which are seen as rivals to Silicon Valley and to US dominance in this field.
Yeah, just an anecdote about how well they're doing, Huawei, is I was at a cafe in Athens, and for the first time, the people sitting next to me, about a group of people sitting next to me, they weren't talking about the iPhone. I was kind of listening. They weren't talking about the iPhone. They're actually talking about the Huawei phones. And I was kind of thinking to myself, going, gosh, a year, 2, 3 years ago, people would be talking about the iPhone and the iPhone. But, this group of millennials, they were talking about how cool the Huawei phone was. And I was just like, there you go.
Well, there you go, indeed. And I mean, I gather Lenovo, which is, of course, in the Chinese company that makes PCs and tablets, is now also breathing down Apple's neck in a somewhat different way. But, the Chinese have invested very heavily in this technology. If you go to China itself, you will see how advanced China is in these fields. It is more advanced than the United States is. In China, you can integrate. You on your smartphone. You can make your payments. I mean, all your payments you can pay with, in a restaurant through your smartphone. It's quite astonishing. You can order goods. You can manage your bank account. you can do incredible things far more efficiently and far more effectively than you can in the US. And again, if you've been to China, you will see that internet shopping or online shopping there is infinitely more advanced than it is in the United States. I mean, Amazon looks almost archaic by comparison. I think it's taken a very long time for the US to twig to this truth. Now they have, and it's scaring them, and they're pushing back.
Yeah, the one scary thing about China, just to drive home the point that it's not all, roses over there, is that they have that social credit score because it is so integrated. That's pretty scary. That's a scary part of their such tight and advanced integration that they have.
Well, it is indeed. I mean, that's the other thing one has to say. I mean, it's not entirely possible for anybody to copy these Chinese systems because they are really only fully effective in the kind of very controlled society that China has. And I mean, when we talk about things like Chinese equivalents of WhatsApp, for example, which do exist, I mean, that's also integrated in all these systems. I mean, it's a single web and, group of systems that all interconnect with each other. But
the government is sitting on top, and it's
exactly. I mean, it means the Chinese authorities know exactly where you are and what you're doing at any point in time, and they're able to read your messages in ways which might not be possible in societies like the United States. So, we shouldn't sugarcoat the reality of China. It is a very impressive place, as I've seen for myself. They know what they're doing. They've achieved extraordinary things over the last 40 years. I mean, China has transformed itself economically and in ways that, is almost unprecedented in modern history. But, there are realities we should not overlook also.
There are lessons to be learned, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Alexander Mercouris, Editor-in-Chief of the Duran, thank you very much. Guys, if you like this video, click on the subscribe button down below and click on the notifications bell to get notifications every time we push out a new video. And visit the Duran shop, pick up a t-shirt, help support the Duran. And in the description box, you will find links to our PayPal and Patreon page. Donate to the Duran. That also helps us out a lot. And of course, you can go to theduran.com and read the articles that Alexander is reading and linking up to every day. Alexander, thank you very much. Till next time, everybody. Take care.